Hand me another one of those beers, Luna. And be quick about it. My father-in-law, Alistair, snapped his fingers without even looking at me. His voice cut through the cheerful chatter of the party like a whip crack. I was standing over a hot grill at his annual Blackwood Valley BBQ, an event that was less about family and more about flexing his status. My apron, a cheap thing with a cartoon pig on it that my mother-in-law had insisted I wear, was stained with grease and flecked with black char. My spirit, I think, was stained with something much worse. Shame. The sun beat down on my neck, and the smoke from the burgers stung my eyes. Or maybe those were just tears I was trying to blink away. Across the perfectly manicured lawn, I saw my husband, Garrett. He was standing with his mother, Beatrice, who had one perfectly manicured hand on his arm, holding him in place. He caught my eye for just a second, and gave me a weak, apologetic shrug, a little twitch of his mouth that was supposed to mean, "What can I do?" And in that moment, I knew the answer was nothing. He could do nothing. This wasn't just a family gathering. It had become my personal hell. A yearly performance, where my only role was to be their unpaid, unappreciated servant. They called me useless, not always to my face, but loud enough for me to hear. They called me a failure, who'd somehow tricked their brilliant son into marriage. My own dreams, the small online Etsy shop I'd tried to run selling handmade jewelry, had become a family punchline. But the real betrayal, the one that hollowed me out, wasn't their open cruelty. It was the suffocating silence of the man who had promised to love and protect me. Have you ever felt so small, so insignificant, that you feel like you might just disappear? Like if you just stood still enough, you'd become invisible. That's what I felt right then, with the sizzle of the grill in my ears, and the weight of their judgment on my shoulders. I took a deep breath, the smoky air filling my lungs, and I made a silent promise to myself. This would be the last time they ever looked down on me. This would be the last time I felt like a ghost at my own life's party. The very last time. The climax of my humiliation arrived about an hour later. Alistair was holding court near the sprawling oak tree at the center of the lawn. He had a glass of expensive whiskey in one hand, and was gesturing expensively with the other, talking to a local councilman named Henderson. I could tell Alistair was trying to impress him. He loved to feel important, to have his power acknowledged by men he considered his peers. I was refilling a bowl of potato salad when I heard my name. "You see, Henderson," Alistair boomed, his voice carrying easily over the music. "The key to success is having a killer instinct. You can't be a dreamer. Take my daughter-in-law, Luna, for instance." He pointed a thick finger right at me. Every head in a 20-foot radius turned. I froze. The plastic spoon hovering over the bowl. She had this little... What was it, honey? An online arts and crafts thing? He didn't wait for an answer. Sold little trinkets, thought she was going to be an entrepreneur. He let out a short, barking laugh. Never made more than $100 a month, a complete failure. No business sense whatsoever. The councilman gave a tight, uncomfortable smile. But Alistair's family, his real audience, roared with laughter. My sister-in-law, Cassidy, who was standing beside him, clapped her hands together in delight. "Oh, Dad, don't be mean," she said, though her voice was dripping with glee. She tried her best. Some people just aren't cut out for the real world. I looked for Garrett. He was standing on the edge of the group, his face a mask of discomfort. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared down at his perfectly polished shoes, his shoulders hunched. He was a coward, trapped by the fear of his father's disapproval. The laughter felt like physical blows. My face burned, hot and prickly. I felt the eyes of every guest on me, the curious, the pitying, the scornful. They saw exactly what Alistair wanted them to see, a useless nobody who didn't belong. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic break, but a quiet, clean one. The part of me that had been desperately trying to earn their approval, the part that kept hoping Garrett would one day stand up for me, simply died. I set the bowl of potato salad down on the table with a firm thud. I untied the strings of the greasy apron, pulled it over my head, and let it fall to the grass. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked away. I walked past the manicured flower beds, past the white linen tables, past the stunned faces of the Croft family. The laughter had stopped. A thick, shocked silence followed me as I walked straight out of the party, down the long gravel driveway of the country club, and didn't look back. That night, the key turned in the lock of our front door around midnight. I was sitting in the dark, a single bag packed at my feet. Garrett came in, his face a mixture of exhaustion and irritation. "Luna? What are you doing sitting in the dark?" "I'm waiting for you," I said, my voice flat. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I know you're upset. My dad, he can be a lot. But you can't just walk out like that." It was embarrassing. "Embarrassing?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You thought that was embarrassing? Not your father calling me a failure in front of 50 people? Not your sister laughing about it? Not you, my husband, standing there and saying nothing? What was I supposed to do?" he pleaded, his voice rising. "Start a fight with my own father at his party? You know how he is. It would have been a disaster." "Yes, I do know how he is," I said, standing up. "He's a bully, and your mother is a manipulator, and your sister is a sad copy of them both. I've known that for years. The only thing I wasn't sure about was you." I looked him straight in the eye. "Now I am. You will never ever stand up for me. Your comfort is more important than my dignity." "That's not fair," he shot back. "My family, they provide for us. My job is at my father's company. What do you want me to do, throw all that away?" "No," I said softly, picking up my bag. "I don't want you to do anything. I just want you to know that I'm done. I am done being the person you all need me to be, so your lives can be easier." I walked to the door. He looked panicked. "Where are you going, Luna? Don't be so dramatic. Just call my dad in the morning. Apologize for making a scene, and this will all blow over." Apologize. He wanted me to apologize. That was it. That was the final crack, the one that brought the whole structure of our marriage crashing down. I opened the door without another word and walked into the cool night air, leaving him and the entire Croft world behind me for good. I didn't have a plan. All I had was the last $2,000 in my personal savings account, an old, sputtering car, and a single bag of clothes. I drove until the fancy suburban neighborhoods melted away into the grit of the city's less fashionable side. I found a motel that rented by the week, and checked in, the fluorescent light of the vacancy sign casting a sickly green glow on my face. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. I sank onto the lumpy mattress, and for the first time since walking out of that party, I cried. I cried for the woman I used to be, the hopeful girl who thought love could conquer anything. I cried for the years I had wasted trying to shrink myself to fit into their world. The first week was a blur of grief and cheap instant noodles. The tiny, dingy studio apartment I found after the motel money ran low wasn't much better. It had a stained carpet, a window that looked out onto a brick wall, and a radiator that clanked like a dying machine. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. In the house I shared with Garrett, there was always noise: the television, his phone calls, the distant sound of his parents' expectations. Here, there was nothing but the hum of the old refrigerator and the frantic beat of my own heart. My phone buzzed constantly for the first few days. Garrett's texts started as apologetic. "Luna, please come home. We can talk this out." Then they grew impatient. "This isn't funny anymore. You're overreacting." Finally, they turned angry. "Fine. Be this way. You're being so dramatic. My parents are furious." That last one was the one that finally made me block his number. His concern wasn't for me. It was for the disruption I was causing in his comfortable life. My pain was an inconvenience. Blocking him felt like severing the final thread. It hurt, but it also felt like taking my first breath of clean air. I spent my days in a fog, replaying every last humiliation, every cutting remark from Beatrice, every dismissive wave from Alistair, every silent shrug from Garrett. Their words echoed in the empty room, a chorus of my failure. I felt adrift, a ship without a rudder, lost in a sea of my own making. But one night, unable to sleep, I stood at my grimy window. Through the gap between my building and the next, I could see a sliver of the downtown skyline, the distant towers glittering like a handful of scattered diamonds. I thought about the Crofts. I thought about their mansion, their country club, their portfolio of commercial buildings. And in that moment, something clicked into place with startling clarity. Their power, their confidence, their bone-deep arrogance, it all came from one source: property. They owned things. They controlled land. They could stand on a piece of the earth and say, "This is mine." That was the foundation of their kingdom, and the source of their contempt for me. I, on the other hand, owned nothing, not even the dingy floor I was standing on. My name wasn't on a deed, a lease, a title. In their world, that made me less than nothing. It made me invisible. That single stark realization didn't solve my problems, but it gave them a name. It wasn't about my failed Etsy shop, or my personality, or whether I was dramatic. It was about power, and their power was tangible, written on legal documents and measured in square footage. A strange feeling began to replace the despair. Not hope, exactly, but something harder, colder. It was resolve. I didn't just want to be independent. I didn't just want to get a job and pay my own bills. I wanted to understand the game they played. I wanted to learn the rules of their world, not to join it, but to beat it. I turned away from the window, walked over to my beat-up laptop, and flipped it open. The screen glowed in the dark room. For the first time in my life, instead of looking for jobs as an administrative assistant or a receptionist, I typed a new set of words into the search bar: urban planning fundamentals, sustainable development case studies, how to acquire land. The journey started right there, in that rock-bottom apartment, with a blank page and a flicker of an idea that felt like a rebellion. My new life began before dawn. The alarm on my phone would go off at 4:30 a.m., jolting me from a restless sleep on my lumpy mattress. I'd pull on the Lec t-shirt and apron of my new job, a barista, at a bustling downtown coffee shop. The work was grueling, the early mornings were brutal, my feet ached by the end of my shift, and I constantly smelled of burnt coffee and steamed milk. But it was honest work. It was mine. The tips I earned, combined with my meager hourly wage, were just enough to cover my rent and buy groceries. It was a lifeline, a thin one, but it kept me afloat. The moment my shift ended at noon, my real work began. I would walk the 12 blocks to the city's main public library, a grand old building with high ceilings and the comforting smell of old paper. This place became my sanctuary and my university. I didn't know where to start, so I started everywhere. I checked out stacks of books with titles that would have put my old self to sleep. Introduction to Real Estate Law, Municipal Zoning Codes, A Practical Guide, Environmental Impact Reports for Dummies. I sat in a quiet carrel in the corner of the third floor for 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours a day, fueled by cheap coffee from the library's vending machine. My notebooks filled with scribbled definitions, flowcharts of permit processes, and summaries of legal precedents. I learned the difference between commercial and residential zoning, the intricacies of land use permits, and the language of architects and city planners. While the Crofts imagined I was probably crying in some corner, a pathetic failure, I was quietly, methodically, building a new mind. To supplement the books, I used the library's free internet to enroll in online certificate courses: project management principles, green building and sustainable design, financial modeling for real estate. I used a fake name for the courses, a small act of paranoia that made me feel safer. I watched lectures on my laptop with headphones, pausing and rewinding until I understood, every concept. The world that had always seemed so opaque and intimidating, the world of business and development, where Alistair reigned like a king, began to demystify itself. It wasn't magic, it was a system. It had rules, procedures, and loopholes. It was a language, and I was slowly becoming fluent. My focus soon narrowed. I kept coming back to Blackwood Valley, the beautiful, sprawling area where the Crofts had their country club, the place they considered their personal kingdom. I studied its zoning maps, its history, its undeveloped parcels, and then I found it tucked away in a dry, jargon-filled report on the state's website. I discovered a plan for a huge parcel of pristine, state-owned land. It was thousands of acres of forest, hills, and streams that were currently protected. The state was planning to open it up for a single large-scale ecotourism project. The bidding process was incredibly complex, requiring a comprehensive proposal that balanced economic viability with a rock-solid commitment to environmental preservation. It was exactly the kind of project a developer like Alistair would ignore. It was too complicated, the profit margins weren't quick and dirty enough, and it required a level of detail and vision that was beyond his smash-and-grab approach to business. He wanted to build strip malls, not nature preserves. This was it. This was my opening. An idea began to form. A wild, audacious, terrifying idea. I could be the one to submit a proposal. I could be the one to win that land. For weeks, I worked with a feverish intensity. My barista job became a hazy backdrop to my real life, which was lived in the library and in my tiny apartment late at night. I began to draft a proposal. It started as a few pages of notes and grew into a monster, a comprehensive plan for a sustainable resort and nature preserve. Complete with architectural sketches I drew myself, financial projections, environmental impact mitigation strategies, and a community outreach plan. Page by page, it grew. 10 pages. 50 pages. It became a 100-page document. A blueprint for a dream that felt more real than anything in my life. It was everything I was, and everything the Crofts thought I wasn't. Detailed, intelligent, and driven by a vision bigger than just money. My proposal was a work of art, a testament to months of sleepless nights and relentless study. On paper, it was brilliant. In reality, it was just paper. I had no capital, no professional standing, and zero connections. Presenting this plan to the state would be like a child showing a crayon, drawing to a board of architects. They would pat me on the head and show me the door. I needed a partner. I needed someone with credibility, with capital, with a name that would make people listen. But who would ever take a chance on a broke, divorced barista with a wild dream? My research led me down a rabbit hole of famous architects, both living and dead. That's when I found him, Julian Thorne. He was a ghost, a legend. 20 years ago, Julian Thorne had been the talk of the architectural world, a visionary genius known for his radical, nature-integrated designs. His masterpiece was supposed to be the Aethelred Tower, a building that was set to redefine the city's skyline, but it was never built under his name. His partners, two slick corporate architects, had staged a hostile takeover of his firm, legally stole his designs, and built a watered-down, cheaper version of the tower themselves. They claimed his original vision was structurally unsound and financially ruinous. The legal battle bankrupted Julian and destroyed his reputation. He vanished from public life, a wounded titan who retreated from the world that had betrayed him. The articles I read painted him as a bitter, angry recluse. Most people thought he had either moved abroad or died, but through some deep-dive public records searches, I found him. He lived in a stark, modernist house made of glass and steel, perched on a cliffside overlooking the very same Blackwood Valley I was targeting. He had hidden himself in the heart of the land he loved. It was a terrifying long shot, but it was the only one I had. Emailing him felt too impersonal, too easy to delete. He was a man who valued substance, not convenience. So I took $100 from my precious grocery money and had my 100-page proposal professionally printed and bound. I put it in a simple black portfolio. Inside, I included a single handwritten note on a plain white card. I must have rewritten it 20 times before I settled on the words. It said, "Mr. Thorne, they said your vision was unprofitable. They're saying the same about mine. I think they're wrong. Luna Vance." I paid a courier service to drive it up the long, winding road to his secluded house. Then, I waited. A day passed. Then two. By the end of the week, I had given up hope. The silence felt like a final rejection. Then, one evening, as I was listless stirring a pot of pasta, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice timid. A low, gravelly voice on the other end said, "Is this Luna Vance?" "Yes," I breathed. "This is Julian Thorne. I have your document." There was a long pause. It's either the work of a genius or a complete lunatic. I haven't decided which. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. "Page 47, he said abruptly. "Your water reclamation plan. You're accounting for gray water recycling, but you haven't factored in seasonal rainfall variations for the reservoir system." "Why not?" I was so stunned I almost dropped the phone. He'd actually read it. Closely. I scrambled for my own copy, my hands shaking. I, I based the initial figures on the annual average to establish a baseline for the budget. I stammered. "The variable flow pump system to accommodate seasonal changes is detailed in the appendix, under equipment specifications." Another pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. For the next hour, he grilled me. He was relentless, suspicious, and brutally direct. He poked holes in my financial models, questioned my material choices, and challenged my timelines. It wasn't an interview. It was an interrogation. With every question I answered, I felt a little bit of my confidence returning. I knew this plan. I had lived and breathed it for months. Finally, he fell silent. "You've done your homework," he said, the gruffness in his voice softening just a fraction. "And you're not afraid of the details." He sighed. A heavy, weary sound. "I lost everything because I trusted the wrong people. I trusted people who saw a blueprint and only saw dollar signs. You see the forest." He paused again. "I'll fund you. I'll back your proposal. Not out of kindness, you understand. I expect a return on my investment. A substantial one. My price is 40% of the entire venture." "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "And one more thing," he said, his voice turning hard as steel. "If we do this, you listen to me. You follow my lead on strategy. You don't get sentimental, and you don't get scared. I've already made the big mistakes, so you don't have to." "Don't you ever make my mistake?" I agreed, my mind reeling. In a single phone call, my life had changed. I had gone from a dreamer with a stack of paper to a businesswoman with a powerful, wounded mentor. The game was on. Our partnership began in the shadows. Julian's first directive was absolute secrecy. "The kind of people we're up against," he'd said in our first face-to-face meeting at his glass house. "They can smell money and ambition from a mile away. We need to be a ghost until the moment we strike." So, we formed a shell corporation. We spent a whole afternoon brainstorming names, discarding anything that sounded too ambitious or flashy. We settled on the most boring, nondescript name we could think of: Ridgeline Holdings. It sounded like a small, sleepy investment firm, not a vehicle for a multi-million-dollar development project. Julian provided the initial seed money, wiring it into our new corporate account from one of his own offshore holdings. Seeing that balance, more money than I had ever imagined, was both exhilarating and terrifying. It made everything real. Under Julian's guidance, I dove into the brutal procedural side of the business. This was the unglamorous grind that no one ever sees. It was endless paperwork, late-night phone calls with zoning officials, and poring over tedious legal documents until my eyes burned. My life became a series of checklists and deadlines. I had to learn how to navigate the labyrinthine corridors of city and state bureaucracy, filing environmental permits, land use applications, and corporate registrations. Every form had to be perfect, every I dotted, every T crossed. Julian was a demanding teacher. He would review every document I prepared, his red pen slashing across my work, pointing out tiny errors or potential legal traps I had missed. "Sloppy work gets you killed in this business," he would rasp over the phone. "Assume everyone on the other side is smarter and more ruthless than you are." One of our biggest challenges was acquiring the access rights to the large state parcel. The land itself was going up for bid, but it was surrounded by a patchwork of smaller, privately owned properties. Without legal access through them, the state land was worthless. So I became a negotiator. I spent weeks on the road in my beat-up car, driving to meet these small landowners. They were mostly old farmers and retirees, people who were deeply skeptical of outsiders. I couldn't just walk in and offer them money. I had to listen to their stories, understand their connection to the land, and explain my vision for a preserve that would honor its beauty, not destroy it. Julian coached me, teaching me how to be patient, how to build trust. One by one, we secured the options to buy their access rights, contingent on us winning the state bid. It was a stressful, thankless grind, filled with moments I was sure we would fail. There were weeks I survived on 3 hours of sleep a night, fueled by adrenaline and the endless supply of coffee I was now an expert at making. While I was building this secret empire, the ruins of my old life were being formally dismantled. One afternoon, a courier delivered a thick envelope to my apartment. It was from a high-priced law firm. Garrett had filed for divorce. I sat on my lumpy mattress and read through the legal papers. They cited abandonment and irreconcilable differences. In the attached declarations, his family's lawyers had painted a portrait of me as an unstable, aimless, and emotionally volatile woman who had walked out on a perfectly good marriage for no reason. It was a work of fiction, designed to make me look like the villain. A year ago, it would have devastated me. Now, it just felt distant. It was a story about a person I no longer was. I signed the papers without a fight. I didn't ask for a penny of alimony or a single asset. I just wanted it to be over. I mailed them back the next day. I knew how the Crofts would see this. To them, my silence and my refusal to ask for money would be the ultimate proof of my failure. They would see it as an admission of guilt, a confirmation that I knew I had nothing and deserved nothing. I could almost hear the celebratory toasts at their dinner table. Alistair gloating about how his son was finally free from the dead weight he had married. They probably imagined I was crawling back to my parents, defeated and broke. They had no idea that every time I signed a permit application for Ridgeline Holdings, every time I secured another piece of the puzzle, I was quietly assembling a plan that would one day dwarf their entire real estate portfolio. They were celebrating a victory in a game they didn't even know they were losing. Just as our momentum was building, we hit our first major test. A man named Marcus Thorne, no relation to Julian, a fact Julian found endlessly irritating, got wind that someone was quietly buying up access rights around the Blackwood Valley state parcel. Marcus was a slick, second-rate developer. The kind of guy who wore suits that were a little too shiny and cologne that was a little too strong. He was also a known associate of one of Alistair Croft's business cronies. He didn't know who was behind Ridgeline Holdings, but he smelled an opportunity. Through some clever digging, he managed to trace the public filings back to a P.O. box and eventually to me. He called me directly, his voice a smooth, confident purr. He invited me to lunch at an expensive downtown restaurant, the kind of place I couldn't have afforded to even look at a few months ago. I went, mostly out of curiosity, wearing the one good blazer I owned. Marcus laid out his offer over a plate of overpriced scallops. He knew what I was trying to do, consolidate the land for the state's eco-project bid. He offered to buy me out. "Look, Luna," he said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Let's be real. You're a nobody. You don't have the capital or the connections to pull this off. I do, he named a number. It was a staggering amount of money, enough to make my head spin. It was enough for me to walk away from everything, the stress, the sleepless nights, the risk, and live comfortably for the rest of my life. I could buy a nice house, travel, never work another day as a barista. It was an incredible temptation. Then came the catch. My partners and I, he continued, sipping his wine, we're not really the eco-preserve types. The state's plan is sentimental nonsense. We win the bid. We use our connections at the city council to get the zoning amended. We clear-cut 1,000 acres of that forest and put up 200 luxury condos. The real money isn't in saving trees, it's in rooftop pools. He smiled. A flash of white teeth. So you take our very generous offer, sign over the access rights, and disappear. Everybody wins. My stomach turned. He was proposing to gut the very heart of my vision, to turn a place of beauty into another monument to greed. That night, I called Julian and told him about the offer. I confessed that the money was tempting. I was tired, and the pressure was immense. Julian was quiet for a long time on the other end of the line. The money is real, he finally said, his voice low. You could take it. No one would blame you. But I didn't back you to build more soulless boxes in the sky, Luna. I backed you because I thought you were different. The choice is yours. But you need to decide what kind of person you want to be when this is all over. I thought about Alistair and his contempt. I thought about Marcus and his slick, easy corruption. They were two sides of the same coin. They saw the world as something to be carved up and sold to the highest bidder. My project, my vision was the antithesis of everything they stood for. Taking Marcus's money would be a betrayal of myself, and of Julian's faith in me. It would be an admission that they were right all along, that everything, even a forest, has a price. The next morning, I called Marcus Thorne and told him my answer. The land is not for sale, I said, and hung up before he could respond. The decision didn't feel triumphant. It felt terrifying. I had just walked away from a fortune and made a powerful new enemy. But for the first time, I felt like the person Julian thought I was. The decision also had an unseen consequence. A week later, Julian got a call from a contact he had deep inside the state government. An anonymous tip had been made to Governor Miller's office, detailing how a small, unknown firm called Ridgeline Holdings had been offered a massive buyout by a developer with a reputation for clear-cutting, and had turned it down flat on principle. My moral test had put our ghost corporation on the governor's radar, in the best possible way. My refusal to sell to Marcus Thorne made him angry. He wasn't used to being told no, especially by someone he considered a nobody. But it was a different kind of coincidence that led to my temporary downfall. My sister-in-law, Cassidy, was at a high-end boutique in a small town bordering Blackwood Valley, a place she only went to feel superior to the locals. As she was leaving, she spotted me. I was on the side of the road, talking to a state surveyor, pointing at a set of maps laid out on the hood of my old car. She saw the serious look on my face, the professional way I was handling the documents. It didn't compute with the image she had of me, the failed, pathetic ex-wife of her brother. Confused and deeply suspicious, she did what she always did. She ran straight to her father. I can just imagine the scene. Cassidy, breathless with gossip, telling Alistair that she'd seen me snooping around the valley. Alistair, puffing out his chest, would have laughed it off at first. Me? Involved in something to do with land? Impossible. But the seed of an idea was planted. He probably thought I was attempting some small, pathetic project, maybe trying to buy a single lot to build a tiny house, a desperate attempt to prove I wasn't a total failure. The thought that I might be trying to play in his sandbox, even on a microscopic scale, was an insult, so he decided to do what he always did to threats, no matter how small, crush them. Alistair made a few calls. He leaned on his network of cronies in the local government, the kind of men who owed him favors. A week later, the attack came. It was a series of frivolous, anonymous administrative complaints filed against Ridgeline Holdings. One complaint flagged our preliminary permit applications for potential environmental hazards, citing a risk to a rare species of local frog. It was a deeply ironic and cynical move coming from a man who had paved over more green space than anyone in the county. Another complaint questioned our company's financial solvency. The result was immediate. All of our applications were frozen pending a formal review. Our progress ground to a halt. For me, it was a terrifying, gut-wrenching moment. The bureaucracy I had worked so hard to navigate was now a weapon turned against me. The review process would take months we didn't have. We had a critical deadline for the state project submission, and this delay put it in serious jeopardy. The legal fees to fight the complaints began to pile up, draining our capital. I felt a wave of panic, the old feeling of helplessness washing over me. They had found me. They were going to destroy this, just like they had destroyed everything else. I called Julian in despair, my voice cracking. "It's over," I told him. "He won." Julian, however, was calm. "This isn't a defeat, Luna," he said, his voice steady. "It's a nuisance. It's what bullies do when they feel threatened. They don't fight fair. They throw sand in the gears." He had seen this kind of tactic before. He guided me through it, connecting me with a sharp, aggressive lawyer who specialized in fighting exactly these kinds of baseless administrative challenges. It was a slow, expensive battle, but we started fighting back. Meanwhile, in the Croft household, they were celebrating. I heard through the grapevine, the way you always do in a small town, that Alistair had been boasting at the country club about how he'd had to put that girl back in her place. They toasted with champagne to my failure. They were convinced they had won, that they had snuffed out my little spark of ambition. They had no idea their attack was about to give me the greatest opportunity of all. Alistair Croft's petty act of revenge was meant to be a killing blow, but it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. The 3-month delay caused by his frivolous complaints was agonizing. It cost us time and a significant amount of money in legal fees. But in his arrogant focus on crushing my pathetic little project, Alistair took his eye off the ball. He was so consumed with the idea of his victory over me, so busy gloating to his friends, that he missed the quiet tremor happening right under his throne. The Blackwood Valley Country Club was the center of Alistair's universe. It was where he made deals, entertained politicians, and cemented his social status. He wasn't the owner, he was just the most important member, the one who acted like he owned the place. The club itself, along with the sprawling acres of prime real estate it sat on, was part of a larger land lease controlled by an aging, out-of-state holding company. And that company, facing its own financial troubles, had quietly decided to sell. The sale wasn't widely publicized. It was an off-market deal, shopped around to a select group of major investment firms. Julian, with his decades of connections, heard about it through a trusted source. He called me late one night, his voice electric with an energy I hadn't heard before. "Are you sitting down?" he asked. "The kingdom is for sale." My heart skipped a beat. We looked at the numbers. It was a massive acquisition, far bigger than anything we had planned. It would require a huge new injection of capital. Julian told me he could leverage his remaining assets to secure a majority of the financing, but I would have to be the public face of the deal, the one to negotiate the terms. It was a monumental risk. If we failed, we'd lose everything. But the opportunity was too perfect to ignore. Alistair's attack had inadvertently given us the one thing we needed: time. Had we not been delayed, our capital would have been tied up in the final stages of the eco-project submission. Now, it was available. It was as if he had held the door open for us. With Julian's strategic mind guiding every move, I stepped into a new role. I was no longer just a project planner. I was a corporate negotiator. I spent 2 weeks in tense, high-stakes negotiations with the seller's representatives. They underestimated me. Seeing a young woman, representing a small unknown firm. I used that to my advantage. I was meticulous, prepared, and relentless, just as Julian had taught me. I knew the property's value down to the last dollar, and I knew exactly what a fair price was. Finally, after a marathon final session, we struck a deal. We used every bit of our combined capital. We leveraged everything. The contracts were signed electronically in the dead of night. Just like that. With a few strokes on a keyboard, Ridgeline Holdings, my ghost corporation, became the legal owner of the entire parcel. We owned the land, the buildings, the golf course, the swimming pool, and the clubhouse. In total secrecy, with no public announcement, I, Luna Vance, was now Alistair Croft's landlord. I owned the stage where he performed his power, the very ground on which he had humiliated me. I sat alone in my small apartment, the signed contract glowing on my laptop screen, and a slow, wide smile spread across my face. The power hadn't just shifted, it had been conquered. A full year passed. A year to the day of the last barbecue. My life was unrecognizable from what it had been. I no longer lived in the dingy studio apartment. I now had a sleek minimalist office in a downtown high-rise, with a view of the entire city. Ridgeline Holdings was no longer a ghost, it was a small but increasingly respected player in the sustainable development space. Our proposal for the Blackwood Reserve project, bolstered by our proven commitment to the area through our recent major acquisition, had just received preliminary approval from the state. The final go-ahead was almost a certainty. I had a team now, a few sharp, dedicated people who believed in our vision. I wore tailored suits instead of a barista's apron. I was no longer the woman who had fled a party in tears. One morning, a crisp, cream-colored envelope arrived with the mail. It felt heavy, expensive. My assistant placed it on my desk. The return address was the Croft family home. My stomach tightened. I slid it open with a letter opener. Inside was a heavy cardstock invitation, engraved in gaudy gold script. You are cordially invited to the annual Croft family Blackwood Valley BBQ. It was for the upcoming weekend. Tucked inside, on a smaller, personal note card, was a message from Cassidy, written in a loopy, feminine hand. It read, "Luna, hope you can make it. We'd love to see what you've been up to. Heard you landed on your feet. Can't wait to catch up." The winky face emoji was the final, condescending twist of the knife. The condescension was so thick, I could taste it. Heard you landed on your feet. It was the kind of thing you'd say about a stray cat that hadn't starved to death. They had no idea. They thought I had a little job somewhere, that I was making a meager living. This invitation wasn't an olive branch. It was a summons. They wanted to see me, to inspect my life, to confirm that I was still beneath them, so they could feel secure in their own superiority. My first instinct was to tear it into 1,000 pieces and throw it in the trash. I had won. My project was a success. Governor Miller himself was planning a visit to the site to personally announce the state's partnership with my company. Why would I ever go back there? Why would I subject myself to their poison again? I left the office early and drove out to Julian's glass house. I found him on his terrace, staring out at the valley. I told him about the invitation, about Cassidy's note. "I'm not going," I said firmly. "There's no point." Julian turned from the view to look at me. His expression was unreadable. "Isn't there?" he asked, quietly. "You've spent a year building an empire in the shadows. You own the ground they stand on. You've achieved a victory they can't even comprehend. But an enemy only keeps their power over you if you're still afraid to face them." He took a sip of his tea. "This isn't about them anymore, Luna. It's about you. They're expecting the person who left that party a year ago to show up. If you even have the nerve, you need to go, not as the person who left, but as the person you are now." His words settled deep inside me. He was right. Hiding, even in victory, was still a form of hiding. Avoiding them would feel like a retreat. It would mean that a part of me was still that woman in the grease-stained apron. That evening, I went home to my quiet, elegant apartment. I opened my closet and pushed past the power suits and sensible work dresses. I chose a simple but beautifully cut sheath dress in a deep sapphire blue. It was elegant, understated, and confident. I laid it out on my bed. As I looked at it, I realized I was no longer dressing to please anyone, or to fit in, or to disappear. I was dressing for myself. I was no longer Luna Croft, the failed wife. I wasn't even Luna, the secret developer. I was Luna Vance, the owner. And I was going back to the barbecue. The air at the Blackwood Valley Country Club was thick with smug satisfaction. It was the exact same scene as the year before, only this time I was seeing it with new eyes, the same faces, the same forced laughter, the same desperate social climbing. Alistair was holding court by the bar, his voice booming across the lawn. Beatrice glided through the crowd like a shark, her smile never quite reaching her cold, calculating eyes. When she saw me arrive, she gave me a slow, deliberate look, her eyes traveling from my simple dress to my shoes, and back up, a silent, withering judgment. "Luna," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How nice of you to come. We weren't sure you'd be comfortable." I gave her a calm, genuine smile. "I wouldn't miss it, Beatrice." My composure seemed to unnerve her. She was expecting me to be timid, apologetic. She swept away to join a group of her friends, no doubt to whisper about my audacity. I saw Garrett standing by himself near the edge of the patio. He looked older, more tired. He started to walk towards me, a pained expression on his face. But Alistair clapped him hard on the back, stopping him. "There's my boy," Alistair roared, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Doing so much better now, aren't you? Sometimes you have to cut off the dead weight to really fly." He winked, looking straight at me. A few of his cronies chuckled. Garrett just stared at the ground. Then came Cassidy. She approached me with a tray of mini kitches, a malicious twinkle in her eye. "Luna, so glad you could make it," she chirped, thrusting the tray towards me. "Here. You know what to do with these." It was a direct callback to the year before, a deliberate attempt to put me back in my place as the help. A year ago, I would have either crumbled or taken the tray. This time, I just smiled serenely. "They look lovely, Cassidy," I said, my voice even and clear, "but I think the catering staff has it covered." I didn't take the tray, I just let her stand there holding it, her smile faltering, as a flicker of confusion crossed her face. My refusal to play my assigned role was throwing them off. They didn't know how to react to this new, calm version of me. That's when the sound started. A low, rhythmic thumping that grew steadily louder. Wump, 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 wump. Heads started turning, looking towards the sky. The sound grew into a roar, and then a sleek, dark blue helicopter appeared over the tray line. It circled once before descending gracefully towards the club's private helipad, a feature Alistair was endlessly proud of. The wind from the rotors flattened the grass and sent napkins flying. The party came to a standstill. Everyone was staring, whispering. Who was important enough to arrive by helicopter? Alistair's face lit up. He puffed out his chest, straightened his tie, and a broad, self-satisfied grin spread across his face. He clearly assumed this important arrival was for him. The helicopter's blades slowed and the door slid open. A man in a sharp suit stepped out, followed by two aides. It was Governor Miller. "Governor," Alistair boomed, striding forward with his hand outstretched, a look of pure triumph on his face. This was the ultimate validation, his importance confirmed in front of all his peers. "What an honor. Welcome to our little get-together." Governor Miller gave Alistair a polite, but brief nod. Shaking his hand quickly before his eyes scanned the crowd, he walked right past Alistair, his expression focused. He walked past a stunned Beatrice, whose smile was frozen on her face. He walked past Garrett, who looked like he'd seen a ghost. The governor's path was direct, unwavering. He stopped directly in front of me. The entire party fell silent. The only sounds were the clicking of a camera from a local reporter, who had followed the governor, and the whisper of the wind. "Miss Vance," Governor Miller said, his voice warm but carrying across the lawn. The use of my maiden name was a small but significant detail. "I am so glad we could catch you. I wanted to congratulate you in person." The crowd murmured. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, the jury of the Crofts peers, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion. "Governor," I said, my voice steady, "thank you for coming. The state has officially approved the Blackwood Reserve project," he announced, "not just to me but to everyone within earshot. Your vision for a sustainable world-class eco-resort is magnificent. It's exactly the kind of forward-thinking leadership this state needs." The governor's aide, a young professional man with a clipboard, stepped forward. He looked at Alistair with a completely neutral expression. "Actually, sir," the aide said, his voice calm and professional, a stark contrast to Alistair's sputtering. "According to our records, the legal owner of this country club and the surrounding 5,000 acres is a corporation named Ridgeline Holdings." The aide glanced down at his clipboard, then looked back up, his eyes finding mine, "of which the founder and majority partner is Ms. Luna Vance." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The silence that followed was absolute, a crushing weight of public humiliation. It was the sound of a worldview collapsing. I turned my head slowly and looked directly at Alistair. His face was a mask of utter shock and disbelief, his eyes wide, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I let the moment hang in the air, letting the truth sink in, letting him feel the eyes of every person he had ever tried to impress bore into him. Then, I spoke, my voice not loud but clear and sharp as glass. "Your lease is up for renewal next month, Alistair," I said. "We should talk." A month later, I was standing on a ridge overlooking Blackwood Valley. The air was cool and smelled of pine and damp earth. Below me, the rumble of an earth mover echoed softly, the first sign of construction on what would become the Blackwood Reserve. It was the sound of a new beginning. Garrett had tried to reach out. He sent long, rambling emails, full of regret and apologies, saying he finally understood, that he had been a coward, that he still loved me. I read the first one, and then deleted the rest without opening them. It was too late. The man I had loved was a ghost, and I had no interest in resurrecting him. His apologies weren't for me, they were for himself, an attempt to ease his own conscience. Standing there on the ridge, watching the future take shape below, I reflected on the nature of their cruelty. It was never really about me. It wasn't about my Etsy shop, or my personality. It was about their own deep, gnawing insecurity. Alistair, who had inherited his wealth, was terrified of being seen as the fraud he secretly believed he was. Beatrice was terrified of losing her social standing. Cassidy was terrified of not being as powerful as her parents. Their cruelty was a defense mechanism, a way to make themselves feel big by making someone else feel small. In trying to crush me, to make me disappear, they had inadvertently given me the one thing I needed, a reason. They gave me the motivation to become bigger and stronger than they could have ever imagined. I wasn't the woman in the apron anymore, defined by their judgment. I was the woman who owned the valley. My victory wasn't the revenge, it was the creation, and my real work, the work of building something beautiful and lasting, was just beginning. The story is a reminder that sometimes, the people who try the hardest to push you down are the ones who give you the fuel you need to fly. True power isn't about humiliating others, it's about building something that can't be torn down. Have you ever had a moment that completely changed the direction of your life? What was the last straw that made you promise yourself you'd never be treated that way again? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed Luna's journey from servant to CEO, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of epic revenge and incredible transformation. Thanks for watching, and remember, Never let anyone else define your worth.